At 3 a.m., a guard's flashlight cuts through the darkness of Alcatraz cell B-152. It lands on Frank Morris, inmate AZ-1441, a lump under his blanket. But the stillness is wrong. The light hits his hair, flat and painted. A cold dread blooms. The dummy head rolls off the pillow and clatters onto the concrete. That sound wasn't just plaster hitting concrete, it was Alcatraz itself breaking. 3 men, armed with sharpened spoons, scraped through solid walls. They vanished from the inescapable island. But the urgent question isn't how they escaped. It's what their impossible vanishing reveals about the very nature of control. What does it say about your own assumptions of invincibility? To understand what happens next, you need to picture Alcatraz in 1962. Not the tourist ruin you've seen in photographs, but a living, breathing machine designed to grind men into dust. It was a maximum security, minimum privilege federal penitentiary, built on a 22-acre rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay. The currents that surround it are famously lethal, with water temperatures that can drop below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, inducing hypothermia in minutes. The prison's motto was simple: you are entitled to food, clothing, shelter, and medical attention. Anything else you get is a privilege. This was the end of the line, a place from which the government claimed no one had ever successfully escaped. Into this machine walked 3 specific men. First, Frank Lee Morris, inmate AZ-1441. Orphaned at 11, arrested for his first crime at 13, Morris possessed an IQ of 133, placing him in the top 2% of the population. He was a quiet master tactician, a man who had already escaped from other prisons. Then there were the brothers, John and Clarence Anglin. Raised in poverty in Florida, they were career criminals, known for robbing banks with a toy gun. They too had a history of escaping local jails and were fiercely loyal to each other. They were the muscle and the heart. Morris was the brain. They were not political prisoners or murderers. They were bank robbers, men who had challenged the system and lost, sent to the one place where the system was supposed to be absolute. You are told they were sent there because they were escape risks. The truth is, they were sent there to be broken. Alcatraz was not just a prison, it was a psychological statement, a monument to the idea that some walls are final. But what you're about to discover is that those walls were already crumbling, literally. And this is where the story stops making sense. The plan began not with a bang, but with a whisper, with the smallest of observations. Frank Morris noticed that the concrete around the ventilation duct in his cell was weak, crumbling from decades of salt air corrosion. For you to grasp the sheer audacity of this, you must understand the routine of Alcatraz. Inmates were counted at least a dozen times a day. Their cells were searched constantly. Every movement was monitored, every conversation overheard. Yet for 6 months, an entire conspiracy unfolded in plain sight. It started with spoons, stolen one by one from the dining hall. They were welded and sharpened in the prison workshop into makeshift digging tools. The digging took place during the daily 1-hour music hour, when the entire cell block was filled with noise. While other inmates played guitars or sang, Morris would play his accordion, a loud, wheezing instrument that perfectly masked the sound of a spoon scraping, chipping, and gouging at concrete night after night. He wasn't alone. In the adjacent cells, the Anglin brothers and a 4th man, Alan West, were doing the exact same thing. They worked in shifts, one man digging, another acting as a lookout, communicating with a system of hand signals and coughs. The debris they created, handfuls of concrete dust, was scattered in the bay during their yard time. But there's a detail buried in the record that nobody flagged at the time. To hide the growing holes, they fashioned fake wall segments out of wet newspaper and cardboard, painting them with colors from a stolen art kit to perfectly match the grimy cell walls. The most brilliant deception, however, was the one that allowed them to leave their cells at night to work in the utility corridor behind the cell block. They began collecting hair from the floor of the prison barber shop. They mixed it with stolen plaster and soap, sculpting eerily lifelike dummy heads. They painted them with flesh-toned paints, giving them closed eyes and the peaceful expression of men deep in sleep. Each night they would place the heads on their pillows, arrange the blankets, and slip through the walls into the darkness. What nobody realized yet, not even the people involved, was that this had already been decided. In that unlit, 3-foot-wide corridor, they established a secret workshop. It was here they began constructing their escape vessel. Over months, they managed to steal more than 50 standard-issue prison raincoats. They used stolen cement and heat from the nearby pipes to painstakingly glue the raincoats together, creating the seams for a 14-foot inflatable raft and life preservers. Every single piece of this operation, from the first stolen spoon to the last glued seam of the raft, was a capital offense within the prison system. Discovery meant solitary confinement for years, a fate many considered worse than death. If you had been a guard walking those tiers, you would have been trained to look for violence, for weapons, for overt signs of rebellion. You would never have been trained to look for a man creating a human face out of soap and stolen hair. What they were building was not just a raft. It was a monument to the system's own blindness. But their meticulous plan had one fatal flaw they hadn't accounted for. And the worst part hadn't happened yet. Here's where it gets worse. The night is June 11th, 1962. A final silent nod is exchanged between the cells. It is time. Morris goes first, his body slipping effortlessly through the hole he has spent months carving. The Anglin brothers follow, their movements practiced and silent in the cavernous utility corridor. They reach the cell of the fourth conspirator, Alan West. They wait. Nothing. They whisper his name into the vent. Still nothing. West is frantically working on his side of the wall. In his haste to reseal the hole that morning after a surprise inspection, he had used too much cement. The fake grill was stuck fast. You can picture him, can't you? The sweat on his face, the taste of concrete dust in his mouth, the sound of his own frantic heartbeat drowning out everything else. He can hear them on the other side, waiting. He can hear the sound of freedom just inches of concrete away. Think about the person you trust most in the world. Now imagine them walking away, not out of malice, but because the clock is ticking and your survival threatens theirs. Frank Morris makes the decision. They cannot wait. West is a liability. They have to leave him. The sound of their footsteps recedes down the corridor, climbing the pipes toward the roof, leaving West alone in the suffocating darkness of his cell. He is the one who will face the guards in the morning. He is the one who will have to explain the plaster head and the hole in the wall. The betrayal was not personal. It was logistical, and that, somehow, makes it so much worse. In that moment, Alan West was no longer a conspirator. He was just another inmate, trapped on the rock, and the details of his eventual confession would unravel everything. But there's a detail buried in the record that nobody flagged at the time. When Alan West finally broke under interrogation, he gave the FBI the entire plan, every meticulous detail. And what the authorities began to realize should make you deeply uncomfortable. This was not a story of 3 men breaking the rules. This was the story of 3 men using the rules of the system to dismantle it from the inside. The official story is that Alcatraz was a fortress of random, unpredictable security. But the escapees knew better. They knew that the guards' patrol schedules were rigid and predictable down to the minute. They knew which hours had the fewest head counts. They knew that the salt air, the very thing that was supposed to make the prison a miserable place to live, was also the agent that was rotting the concrete of the building itself, making their digging possible. They knew the prison's own ventilation system, with its constant, loud hum, would provide the perfect acoustic cover for their work. This wasn't chaos. It was a horrifyingly precise calculation. What you're seeing here isn't just a prison break. It's an audit of a failing system. The arrogance of Alcatraz was its greatest weakness. The administration believed so completely in the myth of their own invincibility that they failed to see the obvious. They saw inmates as animals to be caged, not as intelligent, patient engineers of their own liberation. The escape was a symptom of a much deeper institutional disease, the belief that a system can become too powerful to fail. And as the FBI pieced together the trail of stolen raincoats and sharpened spoons, they realized the plan didn't end at the water's edge. But none of that prepared anyone for what a Dutch biologist would later discover about the tides in the San Francisco Bay on that specific night, a discovery that would rewrite the entire timeline of the escape. That Dutch study, commissioned years later, revealed that the men launched their raft at a precise moment after midnight, catching an incoming tide that would have pushed them directly towards Angel Island. The official conclusion stated that the men launched their raft between 10 p.m. and midnight, pushing into a powerful outgoing tide that would have swept them out into the Pacific Ocean to their certain deaths. This is the narrative you have been given. It is neat, it is tidy, and it reinforces the idea that the system, in the end, always wins. But the tidal analysis showed something else. It showed that if the men had waited, if they had entered the water just after midnight, the tide would have turned. The current would not have pulled them out to sea. It would have pushed them north, directly towards Angel Island, a mere 2 miles away. The plan wasn't just to get off the rock. The plan included a precise, calculated understanding of marine hydrodynamics that the federal government itself did not possess. What you now understand, and what most people never will, is that the escape was never about the 3 men. It was about the idea of Alcatraz. The prison was shut down by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy in March of 1963, less than a year after the escape. The official reason given was that it was too expensive to operate. The unofficial truth, the one that echoes in the empty cell blocks to this day, is that the prison had failed its one and only purpose, to be absolute. Its spell was broken. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers didn't just escape a prison, they killed a symbol. They proved that no cage is permanent and no system is infallible. The dread in this story isn't that 3 criminals might have gotten away. The dread is the chilling realization that the most powerful, most intimidating systems of control are often just brittle facades, waiting for someone with enough patience and a sharpened spoon to find the cracks. And the part nobody could explain came next. This pattern did not end in 1962. It is a fundamental law of power. The more absolute the control, the more spectacular its eventual failure. The answer to the question you've been sitting with this entire video, did they make it, is this. The FBI officially closed its case on December 31st, 1979, concluding that the escapees had drowned in the bay. Their evidence was circumstantial. A paddle found floating near Angel Island, a wallet containing names and photos belonging to one of the Anglins, and shreds of the raincoat material washed up on Cronkite Beach. But no bodies were ever recovered, not one. The U.S. Marshals Service, however, did not close their case. They still have active warrants for all 3 men. Over the years, the evidence for survival has continued to surface, like ghosts refusing to rest. The Anglin family has produced Christmas cards, allegedly signed by the brothers, received for 3 years after the escape. A childhood friend of the Anglins claimed he met them in Brazil in 1975, even producing a photograph of 2 men who bear a striking resemblance to John and Clarence. The truth is, the system lost. It lost control of the men, and more importantly, it lost control of the story. By leaving behind an unsolvable mystery, the escapees achieved a victory more profound than mere freedom. They achieved immortality, becoming a permanent question mark hanging over the legacy of American justice. The system can't admit they might have survived, because that would be admitting defeat. And it can't prove they died, because the Bay never gave up its secrets. We began with a guard in the cold, early morning hours, his flashlight beam landing on a face made of plaster and paint. That quiet, hollow object resting on a prison pillow was the real weapon. It was a symbol of contempt for the system, a statement that you were watching the wrong thing. The next time you are told that a system is inescapable, a career path, a financial debt, a social expectation, remember the story you just heard. Remember that the walls of the world's most secure prison were defeated with spoons because one man noticed a small crack. The real question isn't whether Morris and the Anglins survived the cold water of the San Francisco Bay. The real question is, what walls in your own life are you accepting as permanent, just because you've been told they are? Tell me in the comments, which part of this stayed with you?